homeless, alone, sleeping in bus stations with 2 trash bags full of clothes. Until a billionaire left Ruby Sinclair an empty estate nobody else wanted. People in town laughed at her. They said the mansion was cursed, abandoned, worthless, a place better left forgotten. But hidden beneath the empty estate was a secret vault powerful families had buried for decades. And the moment Ruby stepped inside, someone started hunting her. Before we continue, if stories like this stay with you, make sure to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. 21-year-old Ruby Sinclair stood in the freezing rain outside a crowded bus station in southern Louisiana, clutching 2 ripped garbage bags filled with everything she owned. A soaked hoodie, a cracked phone with 3% battery, and a faded photograph of her mother she refused to throw away. That was all Ruby had left in the world. Cars splashed dirty rainwater across the sidewalk as strangers hurried past her without making eye contact. Some looked annoyed, others looked uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to notice the homeless girl standing alone in the storm. Ruby was used to that feeling. After aging out of foster care, she spent years drifting between shelters, abandoned motels, and nights sleeping beneath highway overpasses. People always promised things would get better. They never did. Then suddenly, one letter changed everything. According to a dying millionaire she had never met, Ruby had inherited a massive abandoned property known as Blackwood Estate, a crumbling mansion hidden deep inside the Louisiana swamps. The problem: everyone in town believed the estate was cursed. When Ruby showed the inheritance papers to a local mechanic, the man burst out laughing. They gave that place to a homeless girl, he mocked. Sweetheart, they're setting you up for something. But hours later, as Ruby's taxi rolled through endless swamp roads beneath crashing thunder, she finally saw Blackwood Estate emerge through the fog. Dark, massive, watching her from the trees, and deep inside the abandoned mansion. Something worth millions had been waiting decades for Ruby Sinclair to find it. The closer Ruby Sinclair got to Blackwood Estate, the quieter the world became. The taxi headlights barely cut through the thick Louisiana fog crawling across the swamp roads like living smoke. Rain hammered the windshield while thunder rolled endlessly through the dark sky above the trees. Even the driver looked nervous. He kept glancing into the rearview mirror every few seconds, gripping the steering wheel tighter the deeper they traveled into the marshlands. Finally, after nearly an hour of silence, he spoke. "You really planning to stay out there?" Ruby looked down at the inheritance papers folded tightly in her lap. "I don't exactly have another option." The driver gave a dry laugh. "That estate's been empty for almost 30 years. Ruby frowned slightly. "What happened to the owners?" The man hesitated too long, then quietly muttered, "Depends who you ask." A chill crawled through Ruby's stomach. Outside, twisted cypress trees bent violently in the storm winds, their branches hanging over the road like skeletal hands. Water flooded parts of the cracked pavement as the taxi pushed farther into the swamp. Then suddenly, the car slowed. Ruby looked up, and her breath caught instantly. Blackwood Estate stood beyond massive iron gates at the end of a long, flooded driveway. The mansion looked enormous, 4 stories tall. Dark brick walls stained black from decades of rain. Towering windows shattered in places, dead vines wrapping around the balconies like they were choking the house itself. Lightning flashed across the sky. For one terrifying second, the mansion almost looked alive. The taxi driver swallowed hard. "Lady, I can wait and take you back to town." Ruby stared at the estate silently. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, because deep down, something about Blackwood Estate felt wrong. Not haunted. Worse, hidden. Like the entire property was holding its breath. But then Ruby remembered sleeping beneath a bridge 2 weeks earlier while freezing rain soaked through her blanket. She remembered being kicked out of shelters once they ran out of beds. She remembered pretending not to cry while strangers stepped over her at bus stations. Nobody had ever offered her a home before. Even if this place was broken, at least it belonged to her. Ruby slowly opened the taxi door. "I'll stay." The driver looked at her like she'd made a terrible mistake. Before leaving, he rolled down the window one last time. "If you hear noises at night," he warned quietly, "don't go looking for them." Then he drove away, leaving Ruby completely alone. The rain soaked through her clothes instantly as she dragged her garbage bags through the half-open gates toward the mansion. Every step felt heavier. The deeper she walked, the more isolated everything became. No nearby houses, no lights, no sounds except thunder and swamp insects screaming in the darkness. By the time she reached the front porch, her hands were shaking from cold. The giant wooden doors stood slightly open, as if someone had entered recently. Ruby froze. Her pulse quickened immediately. "Hello," she called softly. No answer. Only the sound of rainwater dripping from the broken roof above her. Slowly, Ruby pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The smell hit her instantly. Dust, mold, rotting wood, and underneath it all, something metallic, like old coins. Her footsteps echoed through the massive entrance hall while lightning flickered through cracked stained glass windows overhead. The mansion looked frozen in time. Dust-covered chandeliers still hung from the ceilings. Portraits of strangers stared down from the walls. Furniture sat beneath white sheets like ghosts waiting silently in the dark. Ruby moved carefully deeper into the house. Every room looked untouched for decades. Yet, strangely, nothing appeared looted. No broken cabinets, no smashed windows downstairs, no signs of squatters. It was almost like people abandoned Blackwood Estate in a hurry and never came back. Then Ruby noticed something strange near the fireplace. Fresh footprints. She stopped breathing. Mud tracks crossed the dusty floor clearly enough to see. Someone else had been inside the mansion recently, and judging by the size, it was a man. Ruby backed away slowly. Her heart pounded violently now. She reached for the old fireplace poker leaning against the wall and gripped it tightly. "Who's there?" she shouted. Silence. Then suddenly, bang! A loud noise exploded somewhere upstairs. Ruby nearly screamed. Another sound followed. A dragging noise. Heavy. Slow. Moving across the second floor directly above her. Every survival instinct told her to run. But then, the chandelier lights flickered once overhead. Ruby froze completely. Electricity. That made no sense. The estate was supposed to be abandoned. The lights flickered again, then shut off completely. Darkness swallowed the mansion. Thunder crashed outside instantly afterward, rattling the windows hard enough to make Ruby jump. Her breathing became shallow. She could hear movement upstairs again. Closer this time. Creak! One floorboard at a time. Someone was walking toward the staircase. Ruby tightened her grip on the fireplace poker so hard her knuckles turned white. Then finally, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Tall, broad shoulders, face hidden in darkness. Ruby stumbled backward immediately. "Stay away from me." For several terrifying seconds, the stranger said nothing. Then lightning flashed through the windows, and Ruby realized something shocking. The man wasn't breaking in. He was old, maybe 70. Gray beard, long black raincoat, eyes filled with something that looked almost like panic. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. Ruby's heart pounded wildly. "Who are you?" The old man ignored the question completely. Instead, he looked toward the floor beneath Ruby's feet, toward the center of the entrance hall, and when he spoke again, his voice trembled. "Did they tell you about the vault?" Ruby frowned. "The what?" The old man's face slowly went pale, because at that exact moment, a deep metallic sound echoed somewhere beneath the mansion. Clank. Ruby felt the floor vibrate beneath her boots. Both of them froze. Then came another sound. A low grinding noise, like enormous gears slowly moving underground after years of silence. The old man looked horrified now. "No," he whispered. But it was already happening. Somewhere beneath Blackwood Estate, something had just unlocked itself. And somehow, it knew Ruby Sinclair had finally arrived. Ruby Sinclair couldn't move. The grinding sound beneath Blackwood Estate continued echoing through the floorboards like something enormous waking up underground after decades of silence. Clank, clank. The entire entrance hall vibrated lightly beneath her boots. Across the room, the old man's face turned ghostly pale. "No," he whispered again. "It was never supposed to open." Ruby tightened her grip on the fireplace poker. "What is happening?" The old man looked toward the center of the marble floor with visible terror in his eyes. Then slowly, a loud crack split through the mansion. Ruby gasped as part of the floor beneath the grand staircase shifted several inches sideways, releasing a cloud of dust into the air. Hidden underneath the mansion, a staircase was emerging. Ruby stared in disbelief. The old man backed away immediately. "We need to leave, right now." But Ruby couldn't look away, because deep below the opening, faint golden light flickered upward through the darkness. Not electric light, something warmer, older, almost alive. Rain hammered violently against the mansion windows, while thunder shook the swamp outside. Yet somehow, Ruby felt drawn toward the hidden staircase. Like Blackwood Estate had been waiting for this exact moment. For her, the old man grabbed her arm suddenly. "You don't understand what's down there." Ruby pulled away instantly. "Then explain it." For several painful seconds, the old man stayed silent. Finally, he looked toward the hidden stairwell. "My name is Edgar Holloway," he said quietly. "I worked for the Blackwood family 30 years ago." Ruby's heartbeat quickened. "The people who owned this place." Edgar nodded weakly. "They were richer than anyone in Louisiana, but money wasn't enough for them." Lightning flashed across the mansion windows. Edgar's voice dropped lower. The Blackwoods became obsessed with hiding their fortune after the government started investigating them in the early 1990s. Ruby frowned. For what? The old man hesitated. Smuggling, fraud, disappearances. A chill crawled through Ruby's chest. Disappearances. Edgar lowered his eyes. People who crossed the Blackwoods had a habit of vanishing. The room suddenly felt colder. Ruby looked back toward the hidden staircase again. The golden light still flickered below. "What's down there?" she whispered. Edgar swallowed hard. The vault. Thunder exploded outside. Ruby's pulse pounded louder. A hidden vault full of stolen money. Edgar slowly shook his head. "No." His voice trembled now. "Something much bigger." Before Ruby could ask another question. Bang! The front doors suddenly slammed open. Cold wind and rain exploded into the mansion. 3 men entered wearing dark raincoats and carrying flashlights. Ruby froze instantly. The men weren't police, and judging by Edgar's terrified expression, they weren't visitors either. The tallest man stepped forward slowly. Sharp jawline, expensive boots, eyes completely emotionless. "Well," he said calmly, "so the rumors were true." His flashlight landed directly on Ruby. The homeless girl actually found the vault. Ruby backed away instinctively. "Who are you?" The man smiled slightly. "Someone trying to save you from making a very dangerous mistake." Edgar suddenly stepped between them. "She doesn't know anything yet." The stranger's expression darkened immediately. "That's exactly why she's still alive." Ruby's blood ran cold. The two men behind him slowly closed the front doors. The lock clicked. Ruby realized something horrifying instantly. They weren't here to help. The tall man walked slowly across the entrance hall, staring at the hidden staircase beneath the floor. Then he laughed softly. 30 years, he whispered, and the estate finally chooses a street girl. Ruby's anger flared instantly. "I'm not some street girl." The man turned toward her. For the first time, there was something almost cruel in his smile. "No." He glanced at her soaked garbage bags near the doorway. The foster kid sleeping in bus stations. The girl nobody notices. The one desperate enough to move into a dead family's mansion. Every word hit like a knife. Because they were true. Ruby felt humiliation burn through her chest. The stranger stepped closer. "You know why they gave you this estate." Ruby stayed silent. "Because nobody important would ask questions if you disappeared." The room went completely still. Even the storm outside suddenly felt distant. Ruby's heart pounded violently now. "What did you just say?" Edgar looked sick, but the tall man kept smiling calmly. "The Blackwood family spent decades protecting what's beneath this house, and trust me, they'll do anything to keep it buried." Ruby slowly looked toward the hidden staircase again, then back at the stranger. "What's inside the vault?" The man's expression changed instantly. Not fear. Greed. Pure greed. That vault contains enough wealth to destroy powerful people. Ruby's breathing became shallow. "How much?" The stranger laughed quietly. "More money than you can imagine." Then his face darkened. But opening it without permission, he glanced toward the staircase. "Has consequences." At that exact moment, a loud metallic boom echoed from deep underground. Everyone froze. Then came another sound, a mechanical clicking noise. Rapid, sharp, like dozens of locks opening at once beneath the mansion. Edgar's face lost all color. "Oh God." Ruby stepped backward nervously. "What now?" But nobody answered, because suddenly, the golden light beneath the staircase grew brighter, much brighter. And then something impossible happened. The walls of the mansion began humming softly. Ruby felt vibrations traveling through the floor beneath her feet. Ancient machinery hidden below Blackwood Estate was activating. After decades of silence, the tall stranger cursed under his breath. "We're too late." Ruby's pulse exploded with panic. Too late for what? Then suddenly, the hidden staircase lights turned on completely. Rows of gold-colored lamps illuminated the underground tunnel stretching far beneath the mansion. And at the very bottom, Ruby saw it. An enormous steel vault door, at least 20 feet tall, covered in strange symbols and rusted locking mechanisms. But one detail made Ruby stop breathing completely, because carved directly into the center of the vault door was her last name, Sinclair. Ruby's knees nearly gave out beneath her. "No." The stranger looked stunned too. "That's impossible." Ruby stared at the vault in horror. The estate wasn't given to her randomly. Someone had planned this. Someone expected Ruby Sinclair to find the vault. The realization hit her like lightning. Then Edgar whispered something that changed everything forever. "Your mother worked for the Blackwoods." Ruby's entire world stopped. "What?" Edgar's eyes filled with guilt. "She died trying to protect what's inside that vault." Silence crushed the mansion. Ruby couldn't breathe. All her life, she believed her mother died from overdose and homelessness. That was what every foster report claimed. But now, everything she knew was collapsing. The vault, the estate, the hidden staircase, even her inheritance. None of it was random. Someone buried the truth for decades. And somehow, it all led back to Ruby Sinclair. Deep beneath Blackwood Estate, the massive vault door slowly groaned as ancient locks began turning open one by one. Something priceless was waiting inside, and people were willing to kill for it. Ruby Sinclair felt like the floor beneath her entire life had disappeared. The storm outside continued raging against Blackwood Estate, but inside the mansion, everything had gone terrifyingly still. Her mother, the woman she barely remembered, the woman every foster report described as a homeless addict who abandoned her child, worked for the Blackwoods, and died protecting the vault. Ruby's chest tightened so painfully she could barely breathe. "That's not possible," she whispered. Edgar Holloway looked devastated. "I wish I were lying." The massive vault deep beneath the mansion continued unlocking in the distance. Clank. Another lock released. The sound echoed through the underground tunnel like a countdown toward something irreversible. But Ruby barely heard it. Memories she spent years burying suddenly came rushing back. Sleeping in shelters beside women, crying through the night. Social workers speaking about her mother with pity. Teachers assuming Ruby would become another lost homeless statistic before adulthood. Her entire life had been shaped by one belief. She came from nothing. Nobody wanted her, nobody fought for her, nobody cared enough to stay. But now, that story was beginning to crack apart. Ruby looked at Edgar with trembling eyes. "Tell me the truth." The old man swallowed hard before speaking. "Your mother wasn't weak, Ruby. She was one of the bravest people I ever met." The words hit harder than she expected, because Ruby had spent most of her life secretly hating her mother. Not openly, not loudly, but deep down there was always anger. Anger that she'd been abandoned. Anger that nobody came back for her. Anger that she spent birthdays alone while other children went home with families. That anger kept Ruby alive for years. But now, she suddenly felt ashamed of it. The tall stranger standing near the staircase interrupted coldly. "This touching family reunion can wait." His eyes remained locked on the vault below. Once that door opens, every powerful person connected to Blackwood Estate becomes vulnerable. Ruby frowned. What's actually inside? The man hesitated for the first time. Not because he feared the answer, because he feared Ruby hearing it. Edgar spoke quietly before he could respond. "Evidence." Ruby blinked. "What?" "Documents, bank accounts, offshore records." Edgar's voice trembled now. The Blackwoods didn't just hide money down there. Another metallic clank echoed underground. Edgar continued. "They hid proof." A chill spread through Ruby's entire body. Proof of what? The tall stranger looked furious now. "You talk too much, old man." But Edgar ignored him. For years, powerful businessmen used Blackwood Estate to move illegal money through fake charities and shell companies. Ruby stared at him silently. Then suddenly, everything clicked together. The secretive estate, the hidden vault, the threats, the reason nobody wanted the property reopened. This wasn't just about stolen wealth. It was about destroying people powerful enough to erase lives. And poor people were always the easiest lives to erase. Ruby understood that better than anyone. Homeless girls disappeared every day. Foster kids vanished into broken systems constantly. Nobody investigated very hard. Nobody cared long enough. That realization changed something deep inside her. For years, Ruby believed her poverty made her powerless. But now she saw the truth. People like her frightened powerful men precisely because society overlooked them. Invisible people could uncover secrets nobody expected them to survive long enough to tell. The stranger suddenly stepped toward her. "Listen carefully, Ruby." His calm voice sounded far more dangerous than shouting. "You can still walk away from this." Ruby laughed bitterly. Walk away to what? The man stayed silent. And that silence answered everything. Back to shelters, back to bus stations, back to being invisible. Ruby slowly looked around the decaying mansion. All her life, people treated her like temporary trash the world forgot to throw away. But for the first time ever, something important depended on her. Not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, because she survived. And survivors noticed things comfortable people ignored. Another loud boom echoed underground. Dust fell from the ceiling above them. The vault door was almost fully unlocked now. The stranger cursed under his breath. Then suddenly, he pulled out a gun. Ruby froze instantly. So did Edgar. The man aimed directly at the old caretaker. "You should have kept your mouth shut." Ruby's heart nearly stopped. Wait. But Edgar looked strangely calm now, almost relieved. For years, guilt haunted him. Ruby could see it clearly. He spent decades protecting terrible secrets because he was too afraid to fight back. But now, the truth was finally surfacing. And somehow, a homeless girl everyone mocked became the one person capable of exposing it all. Edgar looked toward Ruby one final time. "Your mother hid something inside the vault," he whispered. "She believed only you deserved to find it." Tears burned instantly in Ruby's eyes. Before she could respond, bang! The gunshot exploded through the mansion. Ruby screamed, but not because Edgar had been hit. The bullet shattered one of the underground lights instead. Because suddenly, federal sirens echoed outside Blackwood Estate. Red and blue lights flashed through the rain-covered windows. The stranger spun around violently. What? Dozens of vehicles were approaching through the swamp roads. Someone had called authorities. The man cursed furiously and grabbed one of the other men beside him. "We're leaving. Now." But the vault. Forget the vault. Within seconds, the intruders disappeared into the storm through a side exit of the mansion, leaving Ruby and Edgar standing alone again, breathing hard, shaking. The old caretaker lowered himself slowly into a chair. Ruby stared at him in disbelief. "You called the police?" Edgar nodded weakly. "I've spent 30 years being a coward." His eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't do it anymore." Outside, sirens grew louder, but Ruby barely noticed them. Because deep beneath Blackwood Estate, the vault door finally stopped moving. Silence filled the underground tunnel. Then slowly, a deep mechanical hiss echoed upward. The vault had opened. Ruby stared into the darkness below while her heart pounded harder than ever before. Somewhere inside that vault waited the truth about her mother, the truth about the Blackwoods, and possibly enough evidence to destroy some of the richest people in America. But something else had changed too. For the first time in her entire life, Ruby Sinclair no longer saw herself as a forgotten, homeless girl. She saw herself as someone her mother sacrificed everything to protect. And suddenly, that made her dangerous. By sunrise, Blackwood Estate was no longer a forgotten mansion hidden in the Louisiana swamps. It had become the center of a national scandal. News helicopters circled above the property, while federal vehicles blocked the muddy roads leading into Blackwater Hollow. Reporters crowded outside the estate gates, shouting questions into cameras as rain poured across the swamp. Nobody in town could believe it. 3 days earlier, Ruby Sinclair was just another homeless girl sleeping in bus stations. Now every major news network in America knew her name. The girl who opened the Blackwood vault. Ruby stood silently near one of the mansion windows, watching flashing lights reflect across the flooded driveway below. It all felt unreal. Federal investigators moved rapidly through the estate, carrying boxes of documents recovered from the underground vault. Armed agents guarded every entrance while forensic teams photographed stacks of hidden financial records. The vault had contained far more than money. It contained evidence powerful enough to destroy careers, expose corruption, and send wealthy businessmen to prison. Secret offshore accounts, bribery records, illegal land deals, missing transaction files connected to politicians and charity foundations across multiple states. But buried beneath all the financial documents, investigators discovered something far more disturbing. Photographs. Dozens of them. Young women, runaways, homeless teenagers, girls who disappeared over the last 20 years. Ruby's stomach turned violently when she saw them, because every girl looked painfully familiar. Not personally, emotionally. The exhausted eyes, the frightened expressions, the look people carried after spending too many nights surviving alone. Girls' society stopped noticing. Girls like her. Agent Daniel Mercer closed the file slowly as Ruby sat across from him inside the mansion library. "We think the Blackwoods targeted vulnerable people," he explained quietly. "Runaways, foster kids, homeless women." Ruby looked sick. "Why?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "Because nobody asks many questions when poor people disappear." The words hit Ruby harder than anything else so far. Because deep down, she knew it was true. When wealthy people vanished, investigations exploded immediately. But homeless girls, people assumed they simply drifted somewhere else. Forgotten lives disappeared quietly. Ruby slowly lowered her eyes toward the table. For years, she believed her biggest pain was being poor. Now she realized something worse. It was being invisible. The library doors suddenly opened. Several reporters rushed toward the investigators outside the hallway, shouting over one another, "Is it true there are political names connected to the vault? Did Ruby Sinclair inherit the Blackwood fortune? Was her mother murdered?" Ruby froze instantly. Her mother. Even now, the words barely felt real. The investigators confirmed that Elena Sinclair worked secretly inside Blackwood Estate years ago, collecting evidence against the Blackwood family before disappearing mysteriously. She never abandoned Ruby. She died trying to expose dangerous people. That truth changed everything inside Ruby permanently. All her life, she carried shame attached to her last name. Sinclair. Now that same name terrified powerful men, and for the first time ever, Ruby felt proud of it. Later that afternoon, social media exploded with leaked footage from inside the underground vault. Millions of people watched videos showing mountains of hidden cash, gold bars, and classified documents recovered beneath the estate. But one clip spread faster than all the others. Ruby, standing silently beside the vault entrance wearing oversized thrift store clothes and soaked boots while federal agents surrounded her. The internet became obsessed instantly. People called her the Swamp Cinderella, the homeless heiress, the girl they never saw coming. But the attention brought something unexpected too. Messages. Thousands of them. Former foster children, runaway teens, women living in shelters. People from all across the country writing to Ruby because they saw themselves in her story. One message nearly broke her heart. "I sleep in my car every night. Watching your story made me feel visible for the first time." Ruby stared at the message for nearly 10 minutes without blinking, because she understood that feeling perfectly. The feeling of walking through life like a ghost nobody notices. That evening, Agent Mercer approached her with another discovery from the vault. A sealed envelope labeled, "For Ruby Sinclair only." Her hands trembled as she opened it carefully. Inside sat a handwritten letter from her mother. Ruby immediately recognized the handwriting from old birthday cards she kept hidden in her backpack for years. Her breathing became shallow. The letter read, "Ruby, if you're reading this, then I failed to come back for you." Tears instantly filled her eyes. "I wanted to take you away from all of this," the letter continued. "But once I discovered what the Blackwoods were doing, I knew they would never let me leave alive." Ruby covered her mouth as tears rolled down her face. "I hid evidence inside the vault because I believed someday the truth would matter more than fear." Then came the sentence that shattered her completely. "You were never born to survive on the streets. Ruby, you were born to expose monsters." Ruby broke down crying. Not because of the money, not because of the inheritance, because for the first time in her entire life, someone believed she was worth something. Outside, crowds continued gathering beyond the estate gates while reporters broadcast live updates nationwide. But Ruby barely noticed anymore, because something much bigger was changing inside her. For years, she survived by expecting nothing from the world. No safety, no kindness, no future. That mindset kept her alive. But now, for the first time ever, Ruby allowed herself to imagine something dangerous, a future bigger than survival. The next morning, lawyers informed her the recovered Blackwood assets could legally transfer into her ownership after federal seizure proceedings ended. The amount was staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Enough wealth to change multiple generations. But what shocked everyone most came during Ruby's first public statement outside Blackwood Estate. Reporters expected fear, shock, excitement. Instead, Ruby stepped toward the microphones calmly and said, "I know what it feels like to be invisible." The crowd fell silent instantly. Ruby looked directly into the cameras. "So, if this estate belongs to me now, then I'm using it to help the people everyone else ignores." The reporters exchanged stunned looks. Ruby continued, "No child should sleep in train stations. No girl should disappear because society decides she matters less." And suddenly, the homeless girl everyone mocked stopped looking powerless. She looked dangerous. Because people who survive suffering eventually stop fearing the loss of comfort. And those are the people capable of changing the world. Deep inside Blackwood Estate, the hidden vault stood open behind her. But Ruby Sinclair was beginning to understand something important. The real treasure buried beneath the mansion was never the money. It was the truth powerful people spent decades trying to hide. 3 nights after Ruby Sinclair's public statement, Blackwood Estate was surrounded by armed security 24 hours a day. Floodlights illuminated the swamp roads. Federal vehicles blocked every entrance. News helicopters still circled overhead like vultures waiting for the next disaster. But none of that stopped the fear growing inside Ruby. Because ever since the vault opened, strange things kept happening. Phones inside the mansion randomly lost signal. Security cameras shut off for minutes at a time. And twice now. Ruby caught shadows moving outside her bedroom window deep in the swamp after midnight. Someone was still watching the estate, and they were getting closer. That night, rain hammered violently against Blackwood Estate while Ruby sat alone inside the library, rereading her mother's letter for what felt like the 100th time. "You were born to expose monsters." The sentence haunted her, not because it inspired her, because it terrified her. Ruby didn't feel brave. She still jumped whenever doors slammed unexpectedly, still hid food in drawers out of habit from her homeless years, still woke up panicking whenever she slept in an actual bed too long. Deep down, Part of her still believed everything good could disappear overnight. People like Ruby learned that lesson young. Nothing lasted. Nobody stayed, and safety was temporary. A sudden knock interrupted her thoughts. Agent Daniel Mercer entered carrying a thick folder beneath his arm. His expression looked grim. "We found another hidden section inside the vault." Ruby's stomach tightened immediately. What kind of section? Daniel slowly placed several photographs across the table. Ruby froze instantly. The photos showed dozens of children. Different ages, different cities, different years. But every child shared one horrifying similarity. Each one was marked with a red stamp. Transferred. Ruby frowned. "What is this?" Daniel hesitated. "We think the Blackwoods weren't just laundering money." A chill spread through Ruby's chest. They were trafficking people. The room suddenly felt ice cold. Ruby stared at the photographs in horror. "No." Daniel nodded grimly. Most of the victims were homeless teenagers, foster kids, or runaways. Ruby felt physically sick, because suddenly everything made sense. Why vulnerable girls appeared inside the files. Why disappearances were buried so easily. Why powerful people protected Blackwood Estate for decades. Nobody looks very hard for children the system already forgot. Ruby slowly lowered herself into the chair behind her. She remembered girls disappearing from shelters when she was younger. One day, they'd be sleeping in the bunk beside you, then suddenly gone. Staff always said the same thing. She probably ran away. But now, Ruby realized something horrifying. Maybe some of them never ran anywhere. Daniel opened another folder carefully. "There's more?" Ruby looked up weakly. "We identified one of the men from the mansion." Her pulse quickened instantly. "The tall guy?" Daniel nodded. "His real name is Vincent Blackwood." Ruby stopped breathing. "Blackwood? The family name? He's alive." Daniel's face darkened. "He's the last surviving heir." Ruby's chest tightened painfully. That meant one terrifying thing. Vincent wasn't protecting old family secrets. He was protecting himself. And suddenly, Ruby understood why the threats were escalating. The deeper investigators dug, the closer Vincent moved toward losing everything. Money, power, freedom. Dangerous people became desperate when cornered. Thunder exploded outside the mansion windows. Then suddenly, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the library. Ruby jumped violently. "Daniel." No response, only rain. And somewhere deep inside the mansion, a door slowly creaked open. Ruby's heartbeat exploded. "Daniel." A flashlight suddenly flickered on across the room. Agent Mercer stood near the doorway, reaching for his radio. Backup lost power, too. The radio crackled violently with static, then completely died. Ruby's breathing became shallow, because deep down, she knew this wasn't an accident. The mansion generator was brand new. Federal teams checked it daily. Someone cut the power intentionally. Then came the sound. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving somewhere upstairs. Ruby froze completely. The footsteps continued. Creak. One floorboard at a time. Daniel immediately drew his weapon. "Stay behind me." But Ruby barely heard him, because suddenly she remembered the night she first arrived at Blackwood Estate. The strange footprints, the flickering lights, the feeling that someone was already inside the mansion watching her. Maybe they never left. The footsteps stopped directly above them. Silence followed. Then, bang! A loud crash exploded upstairs. Ruby screamed. Daniel sprinted toward the hallway instantly, while agents shouted somewhere downstairs. Emergency lights flickered weakly red through the mansion corridors. Everything suddenly felt chaotic. dangerously chaotic. Ruby followed Daniel upstairs despite every instinct screaming not to, because fear was changing inside her now. Weeks earlier, Ruby would have hidden immediately. That was how homeless girls survived. Stay quiet, stay invisible, avoid trouble. But something inside her refused to run anymore. At the end of the upstairs hallway, Daniel suddenly stopped. Ruby nearly collided into him. Then she saw why. Written across the wall in dripping black paint were 5 horrifying words. "You should have stayed forgotten." Ruby's blood ran cold instantly. Beneath the message sat another photograph. This time, it was her, sleeping on a bus station bench weeks earlier. Ruby stumbled backward in horror. Someone had been watching her before she ever inherited Blackwood Estate. Before she even knew the estate existed. Daniel's expression darkened immediately. "How long were they tracking you?" Ruby couldn't answer. Her hands trembled violently now, because suddenly this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't coincidence. Vincent Blackwood didn't randomly fear Ruby opening the vault. He feared Ruby specifically. Then Ruby noticed something else hidden behind the photograph. A smaller envelope taped to the wall. Her name was written across the front. Ruby Sinclair. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. "Ask yourself why your mother really chose you." Ruby stared at the words silently. Then her stomach dropped, because for the first time, a terrifying thought entered her mind. What if her inheritance wasn't protection? What if her mother intentionally prepared her for this? Prepared her to survive something much darker? Suddenly, Ruby remembered all the strange survival skills her mother taught her as a child before disappearing. Never trust easy kindness. Always memorize exits. Never stay in one place too long. At the time, they felt like lessons from a paranoid woman struggling to survive poverty. Now they sounded like training. The realization terrified her, because if her mother spent years preparing Ruby, then Elena Sinclair knew danger was coming long before she died. And somewhere out there, Vincent Blackwood was still hunting whatever remained hidden inside Blackwood Estate. But Ruby was no longer the frightened homeless girl sleeping beneath bus station lights. Now she carried something much more dangerous. The truth. And people had already started dying to keep it buried. By the time autumn arrived in Louisiana, Blackwood Estate no longer looked like the mansion people feared. The broken windows were gone. Fresh paint covered the old blackened walls. Lights glowed warmly across the swamp every evening instead of disappearing into darkness. And for the first time in decades, people were no longer afraid to walk through its gates. Ruby Sinclair stood quietly on the front porch one cold evening, watching children play beneath the oak trees, where federal crime tape once surrounded the property. Laughter echoed across the swamp. Real laughter. Not fear, not silence, not secrets hidden underground. The transformation felt almost impossible. Only 4 months earlier, Ruby had been sleeping on a bus station bench with nowhere left to go. Now, Blackwood Estate had become one of the largest shelters for homeless girls and foster teenagers in the entire state. And every single room inside the mansion carried pieces of Ruby's past. One floor became emergency housing for runaway teens. Another became classrooms and counseling offices. The underground vault itself was transformed into a memorial, honoring missing children investigators recovered through the Blackwood files. People traveled from across the country just to see it. Not because of the money. Because of Ruby. The homeless girl nobody noticed had become the face of a national movement protecting forgotten children. But the most emotional moment came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. Ruby was finishing paperwork in the library when someone knocked softly on the front door. At first, she assumed it was another reporter. There were always reporters now. But when she opened the door, Her heart shattered instantly. A little girl stood trembling beneath the rain. Maybe 13 years old. Oversized hoodie, bruises near her wrist, a black trash bag filled with clothes hanging from one shaking hand. Ruby stopped breathing, because she recognized that look immediately. The exhaustion, the fear, the hopelessness. It was the same expression she once saw staring back at her every night in bus station bathroom mirrors. The girl lowered her eyes nervously. "I saw you on TV," she whispered. "They said girls could stay here." Ruby's throat tightened painfully. Behind the child, thunder rolled softly across the swamp, while rain poured through the dark roads leading toward town. No parent, no car, no one searching for her. Just another forgotten child standing in the storm. Exactly like Ruby once was. "What's your name?" Ruby asked gently. The girl hesitated. "Emma?" Ruby noticed the bruises again. And suddenly, memories hit her all at once. Being hungry for days, pretending not to be scared, learning how to sleep lightly because dangerous people always seem to find vulnerable girls eventually. The world called girls like Emma troubled. Ruby knew the truth. They were terrified. That's all. Emma shifted awkwardly beneath the rain. "I can leave if I'm bothering you." Those words nearly broke Ruby completely, because children only say things like that after hearing you're a problem too many times. Ruby immediately stepped aside and opened the door wider. "You never have to ask permission to be safe here." Emma burst into tears instantly. Not loud crying. The quiet kind. The kind children develop after years of learning nobody comes when they scream. Ruby pulled the girl gently inside, while warm light spilled across the mansion floors behind them. And suddenly, everything made sense. The inheritance, the vault, the suffering, even the terrifying secrets her mother died protecting. For years, Ruby believed Blackwood Estate was about hidden money. But standing there beside a frightened child holding a trash bag of belongings, she finally understood the real reason the estate found her. Not because she was lucky, because she understood pain cheerful people never noticed. Only someone who survived abandonment could truly recognize invisible children before they disappeared. Later that night, Ruby walked alone through the memorial hallway beneath the mansion. Photographs of recovered victims lined the walls softly beneath candlelight. Some smiled brightly, some looked shy, some looked terrified. Children and young women's society forgot too quickly. Ruby stopped beside one particular photograph. Her mother, Elena Sinclair. For a long moment, Ruby simply stared silently. Then she whispered softly, "You were right." Tears filled her eyes instantly. Not painful tears anymore. Grateful ones. Because finally, she understood the sacrifice. Elena Sinclair didn't die protecting money. She died protecting the truth. The truth that vulnerable children mattered even when society treated them like disposable ghosts. And now Ruby carried that truth forward. Outside, snow like ash from distant swamp fires drifted softly through the Louisiana night, while lights glowed warmly from every window of Blackwood Estate. The mansion no longer looked cursed. It looked alive. Safe. Like home. Weeks later, during a nationally televised interview, a reporter asked Ruby the question millions of people still wondered. How did a homeless girl survive all of this? Ruby smiled quietly for several seconds before answering. "I stopped waiting for the world to save people like us." The studio fell silent. Ruby continued softly. "When you grow up abandoned, you learn something early. You realize invisible children have to protect each other because nobody else always will." Across America, millions watched quietly. Former foster children, single mothers, runaways, teenagers sleeping in cars, people carrying wounds nobody around them could see. And for the first time in years, many of them felt understood. That was Ruby's real power. Not the inheritance, not the millions hidden beneath Blackwood Estate. It was her ability to make forgotten people feel visible again. Late one evening, months later, Ruby stood outside the mansion watching dozens of girls decorate the front yard for Christmas. Laughter echoed through the swamp, while warm lights wrapped around the giant oak trees overhead. Emma ran past her carrying boxes of ornaments with several other children close behind. For the first time in decades, Blackwood Estate no longer hid fear underground. It protected hope instead. Ruby looked up toward the glowing mansion windows while cold winter wind moved softly through the trees. Then she smiled quietly to herself, because somewhere deep inside, she finally understood something beautiful. The world tried to convince abandoned children they were unwanted. But sometimes, the people who receive the least love become the ones capable of giving the most love away. And sometimes, the girl sleeping alone at a bus station becomes the woman who builds a home for everyone else. Ruby Sinclair spent years believing she was invisible. A homeless girl, a foster kid, someone the world stopped noticing. But her story proves something powerful. Your past does not define your worth. The same girl people ignored became the reason abandoned children finally felt safe. Ruby didn't become strong because life was easy. She became strong because pain taught her how deeply people need kindness, safety, and hope. And sometimes, the people who grow up with the least love become the ones who give the most love away. There are thousands of real Ruby Sinclairs out there right now. Kids sleeping in shelters, teenagers aging out of foster care, young people pretending they're okay because nobody asks if they are. Sometimes changing a life starts with something small: listening, helping, making someone feel seen. Because people rarely forget the person who treated them like they mattered when the world didn't.